And we're live. Welcome back to the LOOPcast today, brought to you by Real Estate for Life. Talk to a faith-based agent you can trust at realestateforlife.org. Welcome back to the LOOPcast. We have an excellent show prepared for you today. I hope your brackets are alive and well. But we have a full show today. Erica, before I answer that question, what are we touching on today's show?
We have quite the show. We have the men on the right, the younger generation, and the gender gap between men and women, and what does that bode for the future of society? Big questions. Then we have the Social Security scam, and is Trump shutting down Social Security like all the mainstream headlines were telling us over the weekend, scaring all the grandmas? Soda. Are we going to be paying for soda? And what does the left think about that? And Snow White. Snow White finally came out 2.5 years late, and it was worse than you thought. So we're going to break that all down for you. It's going to be great.
Josh, you know what a bracket is, right?
I was kidding. I know what a bracket is. It's March Madness.
I love March Madness. I'm a big fan, and I live way up in the north, so it's like, when March Madness begins, there's still a ton of snow on the ground, and then when it's over after those 3-4 weeks, it's like, yeah, spring is coming.
You might have a daffodil or two. Yeah,
it's magical. I think it is the great American playoff tournament. I think it pound for pound the best of all major sports.
If you talk about a full playoff round, yes, but it's nothing bigger than the Super Bowl, obviously.
That's what I'm saying. That'd be the only one, but in terms of its entirety of it, in terms of interest and storylines,
and they try to screw it up. They were flirting with a couple years ago, like, oh, let's maybe make it 120. No.
No, it's perfect.
The lead in so that they have the 4-game lead in is, no one really cares about that, but they still have stuck with the premise of the 64. It's solid. Don't screw it up. It's just perfect.
No change necessary. I'm riding with the Spartans this year. But before we get into our topics today, got to talk Real Estate for Life. So today's LOOPcast, as I said, sponsored by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life has 1,400 experienced faith-based agents throughout all of North America and right in your local community. So if you want to chat with an expert that shares your values, you can at realestateforlife.org. That is realestateforlife.org, or call 877-LIFE-US1. That is 877-LIFE-US1. Look, it really pays to work with people that share your values and you get along with. I highly recommend, if you're looking to get a house or start in real estate, head over to Real Estate for Life. Thank you so much for sponsoring today's episode. And we got a lot to get into. So I will say this one popped up on Friday. There's been a lot of different post-mortems about the election. And some of them have been pretty hilarious conclusions that I've gone out of my way not to correct per se. I remember the DNC meeting after said that Kamala Harris's loss was all chalked up to racism, sexism, and misogyny, and for people to raise their hand if that's what they thought. And everyone rose their hand. So I'm not going to get in the way of that. But Ezra Klein, infamous at the New York Times, a deep thinker, some might think. He actually brought on, I actually thought this was pretty good content. They were pretty transparent. They're both leftists. They both come from the left side of the aisle. David Shore, the data analyst he brought on, is from a Democratic polling firm, Blue Rose Research. But they found one of these charts, he said, actually made him do this podcast to begin with. And we're going to go over what that is and talk about some of the implications here. So here's the clip that I was talking about, found over the weekend.
White men who were 75 years old supported Kamala Harris at a significantly higher rate than white men who are 20 years old.
That's exactly right.
That's a real shift.
It is a real shift. This is the thing I am the most shocked by, I think, in the last 4 years, is that young people have gone from being the most progressive generation since the baby boomers, and maybe in some ways more so, to becoming potentially the most conservative, generation that we've experienced, maybe in 50 to 60 years. And so, the next chart, just to describe
this chart in some ways convinced me to do this podcast.
Oh, thank you.
This chart shocks me.
I agree. This is, to me, the scariest chart in this entire presentation. And again, something I'm very surprised by. On the bottom, we have age. And at the top, we have the gender gap in support between women and men. And, for support for Kamala Harris. And so what you can see is that, for voters over 30, the gender gap was fairly stable at around 10%, which is roughly where it's been in American politics.
And voters over 75, it's even lower.
That's right.
It's a fairly low gender gap among older voters.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people, underestimate how recent the gender gap is. Historically, Republicans did better with women than men. And, this was true across most of the West, that center-left parties did better with men than women. And, that's changed in the United States in the Clinton era. But, it's been stable since then. But what's crazy is if you look at people who are under the age of 30, the gender gap has exploded. If you look at 18-year-olds, 18-year-old men were 23 percentage points more likely to support, Donald Trump than 18-year-old women, which is just completely unprecedented in American politics.
Is that abortion?
I think it's too early to say exactly what the cause is. What's interesting is that this is happening in other countries as well. Obviously, different countries have different political systems, but I've seen similar patterns in Canada, in the UK, in Norway. There's a lot of research, to do here, but it's still very striking.
Okay, but they didn't answer. I mean, that immediately goes to the question whether it's abortion. But like, if you look at the data, is it really that women in their early 20s are voting much more strongly for Kamala than women over the age of 30? Or is it that the difference was in how the men voted? Like, that's, if you have a gap, why is the gap? Is it because, men are supporting Trump that much more? And that's actually what it was. It was young men in their, early 20s who were majorly going for Trump in larger numbers than men over, at other ages. Much more than millennials, much more, so that's the big, so it for young men in their early 20s, it's not going to be, as much as I would love it to be the case, it's not going to be abortion. They automatically assumed it was higher support amongst women, when in fact it was for Kamala, when in fact it was higher support amongst those young men for Trump.
Mm-hmm. And so I want to be specific here, especially for our audio listeners who couldn't see these graphs. And if you want to hop over to the YouTube, go ahead and subscribe. You can join us live Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 11 a.m. Eastern. But that being said, I want to be really specific. He said 20-year-old white men voted for Donald Trump at a significantly higher rate than 75-year-old white men. I've seen some people interpret this. Right. Crazy, right? Okay. Really crazy. I've seen some people interpret this as young men are more conservative, potentially the most conservative generation ever. I think that might be true independent of this poll. To me, I heard they voted for Donald Trump. I don't think that necessarily means, they're going to employ some Catholic sexual ethics, or all of a sudden they're going to start, having the wife stay at home, live at home. And maybe some of that's true, but I just want to be very specific. It was voting for Donald Trump. And then the second one is this gender gap of support for Democratic candidates between men and women. So that'd be women supporting Democrats and then the men not supporting Democrats. It's very stable for most of it over the age 30. People in those relationships, they both vote the same way. And now we're seeing just a huge disparity between 18-year-olds when it comes to how men vote and women vote. So those were just to be specific for the audio listeners, what we were seeing. So, I mean, the obvious question now is, and I want to hear from you, Erica, maybe we can start with 20-year-old white men. Why? Why was there this historic change? Usually these people vote for liberals, think Obama, think it was kind of fashionable for young men to vote for Democrats.
Right. And I think we were hearing the shock there in Ezra Klein's voice, because we've been following this for the entire campaign. And then after the election, we've noticed this, that while the younger generation, if they were taken as a block, they went 53% for Kamala Harris. But when you broke it down by sex, the young men were trending towards Trump. So this most progressive generation that they were supposed to be just isn't materializing for the guys. Now, I think it's interesting. I did a little digging into Ezra Klein's and Derek Thompson's new book this weekend called Abundance. And this is sort of their response, very rapidly put together, considering that we're looking at a massive world historical shift here. But they put this together since the election as their answer for how to win really the young men back over. And they're calling it abundance. They're saying liberals need a new politics of abundance, where they're going to emphasize things like invention and creating and manufacturing and bringing that back to the United States. And I think that for the book, the interviews that I listened to, they seem to be floundering quite a bit, but I think they are pinpointing why the young men left. And it wasn't because suddenly all of the young men are discovering Christian sexual ethics. It's not necessarily a cultural shift, although I'll get to that in a second. But it does seem to be more in the they want more of the hillbilly elegy. They want that the manufacturing to come back, the invention, economics, etc. But I think there is a cultural element here of, look, like, you can't tell men for 60 years that they're irrelevant, they're stupider than women, they have a supremacy complex, they've been running the world and they've screwed it up, and then expect them to stick with you. So I think there is a cultural element here that Ezra is missing in his whole, like, we just need abundance theory back.
I'd like to tee off on that, because it's one thing to have like TV shows and commercials where men are stupid and,
Yeah, like the
guys can just
doofus
kind of-
dad from the 90s. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you can just roll your eyes at it, whatever. But then you get 2019, the beginning of like all this DEI stuff, and then you have COVID, and basically white guys are the problem with everything in the world. Like, again, like one of the arguments that Trump made in the first term was like, okay, so if you take down the statue of a slave owner, then are you going to take down statues of George Washington? Or the Confederates? I mean, they're going to take it of every slave owner, like George Washington, Thomas Jefferson. No, we'll never do that. And then all of a sudden they take down the statue of, Teddy Roosevelt in New York City. Like, wait, what?
I think it was Thomas Jefferson, but yeah.
It's like, well, I mean, why Teddy Roosevelt? Like, it doesn't really make sense. Like,
it was Thomas Jefferson, but yeah.
No, there was a Teddy Roosevelt statue taken down in New York City.
Really?
Yeah. They took down the Jefferson one at City Hall or whatever, and then they took down Teddy Roosevelt at the museum or whatever.
You're right. Okay.
So again, it just gets to the question of like, like it's one thing for feminists to kind of roll their eyes and scold at men. Like, yeah, that's been, as Erica said, that's been happening for 60 years. But then they amped it up, and it was like, we have to, like, make sure that, there's no white guys in commercials hardly anymore. Like, we have to replace them with everyone because the whole Black Lives Matter. So now it's and we can just roll our eyes at that a little bit. But then as they implement it into DEI policies, and it's like, oh, you're a white guy, try getting a job now. And also, oh, by the way, with all this inflation that we had because of COVID, try buying a house now if you're a young guy in your 20s. Forget it. Like, there's so many ways that we've put the squeeze on people. And so now Rahm Emanuel is like starting to panic. He wants to run for president, and so he's convened this emergency meeting of mayors and governors because they're also concerned. This Rahm Emanuel is like, he's seeing these same kind of numbers, and he's freaking out that conservatives are seeing a massive spike amongst the youth. And I just can't help but think about it. It's like, I can't believe locking up kids to keep teachers unions happy. Blaming white guys for all the problems of the world, and suddenly you're having a problem with your electoral politics. I mean, the Democratic Party's message is that every white guy is a racist bigot, and Mexicans should stay in the fields and pick the
who's gonna
pick the fruit.
Yeah,
who's gonna clean my toilet, right? And I think I think we saw this over the weekend as well with more Democrat rallies, so the Bernie Sanders AOC rallies, where they're doubling down on that far leftist. They're like, the problem is with this election, the reason we lost was because we didn't go far enough left. We need to go even more extreme left. And then you have the Gavin Newsom contingent, which is in the Rahm Emanuel, like they're like, we got to moderate,
which is smart.
I
think that is actually
smart,
a
except
lot more
it's
dangerous.
fake because they actually believe that men can turn into women.
They won't do it.
They won't.
Right, but
they
say it's
moderate.
fake, say whatever. That's the smart play. I think
it's the politically expedient play.
Right. The observation that I would add here is one, like, you got to think about an 18-year-old right now was born in 2008, which is crazy. Make us all feel old. But their entire promised coming of age events was basically robbed from them in a couple different ways. One being COVID being the big time. I mean, the entire world,
high school graduations, college graduate, all of the rituals
gone. That's all gone.
Confirmation for some kids.
And for them also, like, a lot of the affirmative action racial policies affected their opportunities when it came to colleges that they could get into, jobs that they were applying for. Also, they came of age in the Me Too era. So specifically for young white men, that was like a really challenging time to navigate dating, any of that. I mean, so they've really come under a time where Democrats controlled power, and the events that were going on pushed by Democrats were all very anti-men would be probably the most charitable way to put it. And then you throw in the racial element that happens too. So I think there's definitely a degree of rage, I think, just that has been building up, and they have the people to point the finger at now.
So here's the interesting thing, because of everything you just listed, Pogo, they equally would have affected males and females. So the economic issue, like women are paying a lot for eggs, women can't buy houses either, et cetera, et cetera. But the one that you mentioned, the #MeToo, that's more of the like cultural growing out of the sexual revolution whiplash thing. So I think there's a lot of rage on both sides. Like there's a lot of anger and discontent, both in the male and the female. They share the economic burdens, right? And the disappointments. But where the difference lies is that the young women seem to be reacting by going far left, and the young men are reacting by going far right. And that's a really bad place for a society to be, because regardless of IVF and surrogacy, we still need men and women to get together and mate and form stable marriages in order for society to go on. And so,
well, I don't disagree with you, but like it's going to be the equivalent of like a famine. Because you're going to have this generation of women in their 20s who've adopted the progressive left-wing ideology. They're the total girl bosses, and like the discussion on this is really interesting online. And every day I think my lucky stars, I am happily married for near 20 years. And I'm not out in the work. I'm in guys in their 20s, dude. And here's the funny thing about it. The internet has made this worse because I think there's so many goofy simps out there that are like sending all sorts of fake praise towards women. They did a survey.
Like Harry Sisson.
They did it. Yeah. They did a thing on OkCupid where they surveyed, women, and they surveyed men, and they asked them to judge the people on this site, between very attractive, moderately attractive, average, not really that attractive, and not really attractive at all.
Downright ugly.
Right? Like the 5 things, right? And men, they interviewing all the women, looking them over, they basically said like it was a bell curve. It was like, 7-10% were very hot and 5 to 7% were very ugly. But like with most of them are either a little bit more attractive or in the middle, or maybe not so much. It was pretty balanced bell curve. And you look at that, probably the way life really is. Then they asked the women.
Oh, boy.
How many would you think of as very attractive? It was like 0. And then like kind of attractive was like a small number. And then medium was also kind of small. Not so attractive was like the biggest graph. And like downright ugly was the second highest. And so their version of these girl bosses in the 20, like every 5 thinks she's a 7 and should be able to land a 9, whereas guys maybe have a little bit more like a perspective. I feel sorry for the men in the dating pool right here. So what's going to happen? These girl bosses are like, no, what's good enough for me? And you're going to be single and you're going to have your cats. And then the men are just going to be like, whatever. And then maybe a few years later, another crop of ladies will come along in their 20s and they'll be in their 30s and they'll be like, hey, I was part of a lost generation. These ladies are crazy, but I have a stable house. What's going on? And that's what it's going to be, the equivalent of like how things were like in the famine. Like,
well, it's perfect conditions for harems, right? Because you have multiple women who are all competing over the one guy. But then we
do have harems in our society. It's called OnlyFans.
Situationships, yeah. And I think too, it is a famine on the other hand, for young men who want to find a woman who shares his values. That is so much more difficult. Like a woman who would be willing to work part-time or not at all and take care of, 3, 4, 5 kids. Like they have a vision of a more conservative, traditional family life. And with these polls, the real frightening thing about them to me is that it is so important when you marry to share fundamental values and the most important questions you answer together, because life's hard enough. If you don't agree on the most fundamental things, like the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune are going to knock you off your rocker. And so it is a very concerning trend. And I think it is
Can I ask on that poll then real quick? So we were saying there's a big disparity in how younger like men and women are voting currently. So would you say the general trend would be married couples for the most part after that, age 30. So I'm not sure exactly what generation that would be, but like 30-year-olds on typically agree with each other politically for the most part.
Yes, actually, and what they find is that marriage has a moderating effect on both men and women. And I don't mean like moderate, like, oh, now they're wimps. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that it tends to be the case that when you're single, you have, strong opinions about the world or whatever. And then when you meet somebody else and you get married to them and you pledge your life for the rest of your life, then suddenly, some of these more sharper edges get kind of, and it's not just the men, it's women too. They kind of like, people both kind of calm down. And when men are around other men and they're all single, like, oh, this is the way it is. And they all think they're right and smart and wise. And then they realize that there's a whole lot more to life that they really didn't understand when they're married to a woman and they see that from the same perspective. The difference is that I'm willing to admit that's also the case for the lady folks. You get a bunch of 20-year-old women together and they think they've got everything else figured out. And then they get married and like, whoa.
I'd be curious to see how this corresponds with like marriage rates in general, I guess. Like, I wonder, I would assume down.
Yeah, marriage rates are definitely down. And that's the kind of what I was getting at, like that 25 to 35-year-old women right now, they're the girl boss generation, and they're less inclined to get married. Mm-hmm. And men, I think this is a trend I've been talking about for a while. I think, like when I talked about the Ohio State football team and all these guys who are not just the Harrison Buckers, but like lots more men who are being very vocal and active about and professing their love of Jesus Christ. And they're like, what is going on with this? I love it. It's awesome. Mm-hmm. It's striking. And I kind of think it's because we're the people who are, 20 years old right now have lived their full life in a very digital way. And if you're a man and you're 20 years old, you have been exposed to nasty pornography, not just like a little Playboy that you found in your dad's closet or something like that. And it's all served up to satisfy your ego. Oh, you like this? Oh, you like that? Or you like this? And it pummels you. And so they have to do a clean purge. They have to strike at it and realize this is trying to attack my soul. This is evil, and I hate this. And they're becoming, I think, men of virtue because they're having this thrown in their faces, and they're having to be. It's a much more difficult situation than I'm Gen X. I mean, it was not like this at all.
It wasn't available like just with a swipe, right?
At your fingertips, yeah.
Yeah, for the men who have overcome that, for the young men who are in their 20s and 30s now who have overcome the smartphone, the rise of the smartphone, and they're digital natives, but they're not porn addicts. Like they have fought a serious fight in a way that, like you said, our grandfathers didn't have to, in terms of that vice. There were other vices back in the day. But
for sure. But what you're seeing is a support system on all that. Like, here's how to battle porn. Here's how to do weightlifting.
So
find other ways to channel your energy. And so that's why are there so many guys online doing the whole gym bro stuff and lifting weights?
It's channeling the energy, right?
It's like, they're channeling their energy. So
all right, can the 20-something-year-old on the podcast, the 20-something-year-old on the podcast needs to speak at this point.
Oh, right.
If you guys remember, I am actually a part of this cohort. Mercer. I think all true. What I will say, and I think this corresponds with, there's a Pew Research poll recently. I think it said that for the first time, Christianity has stopped declining. It hasn't grown, but rates of Christianity in America have stabilized, which is the first step to growth. And I think this I think I was listening to, like, Michael Knowles was talking about this on a podcast, but there's a real desire for something to hold on to, I think, for my generation, because we've been raised on probably the quickest changing set of incentives or what should be important to you. Like, sometimes by the year it changes to the point where you're not really sure what to hold on to. And the idea of like moral relativism, I think it's just in the air, like throughout my entire childhood. I think being exposed to just more information than ever online. I'm a digital native. You can go find anything you want, and someone's going to make an argument here. Someone else is going to make an argument here. And if you don't have really strong mentors or family members in your life that can provide you not only just like a mental framework, but they live that life as well, and you see satisfaction there. I think also my generation dealt with more divorce during the financial crisis than probably a lot of other generations. I know many friends personally who come from families of divorce. And so I think the appeal to Catholicism and Christianity and marriage, actually, for that matter, is that you have something real and dogmatic in the positive sense. I think it's often used with negative connotations, but it's something to believe in, something to work towards. And I think maybe what Democrats are kind of missing here in this scramble to get the new Joe Rogan or whatever is the vision.
It's not going to be Ezra. I'm just going to throw that.
Yeah, right. Ezra can say abundance or whatever. I think he's close, but I think what it really appeals to people about Trump is unapologetic vision for America being good, being great. That is really appealing to men. I think as you throw in all the extra discrimination stuff, but to be very transparent and put forth a vision for a country in which you can work a good job, you can afford a home, you're not going to be discriminated for based on your beliefs or based on just debates you're having online. There's no like school marm. You can just get removed from the internet
Cancel
or whatever
culture.
if you do cancel culture. I think the left certainly has a problem with what would they call it? Like, I'm blanking on the words. It starts with a P. Pariahs, maybe, like people that break from the conventional logic of purity tests of what you have to believe. You have to believe that men can become women. If you do not, you're wholesale rejected from the party. You're no longer welcome back. That's why I think it's not as much Republicans here. I think Republicans allow, and that's why they gained a lot of people who, like I said, maybe aren't traditional Christian ethics, but just saw that they were hated by one side and wanted free shelter. I think that's one of the big innovations of Trump is it is a broad tent. It is a coalition for now. Who knows how long it'll last. But he was able to bring over a lot of the people that were just truly freaked out by like Kamala Harris paying for transgender surgery for illegal migrants. Like that's an ad lib that is real. But the freaked out people see a safe refuge, and people that are frustrated with the authoritarian nature of the left, which ironically is projected on the right now when it comes to medical science and consensus, and frustrated with things obviously not matching up with reality, have come over to the side too. So now it's a question of, can you keep it? But none of this surprises me as young white male 20s cohort, for sure.
I just want to tack on one little thing. I thought great insight though that you had, which is hard for me to say for you, but President Trump in 2016 was very much, this system is crap, blow it all up, what a lie, these guys are all fake. But he didn't have as much on his positive vision for the future. And I think that's the difference in 2024 when he ran for president. He did have more of an vision, like he and Elon Musk, and I want to go to Mars and let's open up, or
let's build here.
Let's build.
Well, and JD Vance, right?
Yeah.
JD Vance has given it a robust, actual like Catholic vision.
Let's build here. We're going to bring inflation down. People are going to be able to afford things again. You're going to be proud of your country. Our military is going to be strong and lethal. You name it. I mean, there's like 8 different things. We know what men and women are.
Yeah, and he had a positive vision, and that's why he not only got the Electoral College, he actually won the popular vote.
No, and I will say also what appeals to men is he lived that vision as well. I mean, I've never seen someone almost get shot in the ear, pop back up, and then a couple other assassination attempts. Like, say what you want about that's what I think people don't understand about like men and Trump is like men want to see action. Like all the words are fun. Like Kamala Harris and she was even bad at words, so I don't even know why they ran her. But Donald Trump, in terms of action, is really hard to dispute that he possesses some type of heroism or courage. And you can call that naive or whatever, but I think it's obvious. Anyone that just casually observed the election, it was true.
He has guts. That's for sure.
At minimum. All right.
At minimum.
Into the next section, we have some Social Security talk. Now, Josh, I always think of this whenever this comes up because you often talk about how George Bush misinterpreted his mandate and decided he wanted to privatize Social Security, and that was his big kryptonite, right?
Yeah, it was pretty stupid.
So now there's a little bit of talk. I actually saw, let me just read the Axios headline here, because I was watching this in real time, and classic fake news job here. Seniors won't complain if they miss a Social Security check, Lutnick says.
Oh my gosh.
This is straight from Axios.
Yeah.
Why it matters. More than 70 million Americans get a Social Security benefit every month, and for many of those checks are their only income. For generations, Social Security was called the third rail to American politics, and many talked to reformed, but in end, no one really touched the system. I listened to the interview where Howard Lutnick said this, and I'll give a huge shout out to the All In podcast. They did one with Scott Bessent, Treasury Secretary, and Howard Lutnick, Commerce Secretary. And it was hilarious to me because they're really trying to, I think, make it a similar George Bush type issue, like as a real attack on the Trump administration here for even dancing around Social Security. Because there's two levels of criticism. The first criticism is on Doge, is like, oh, well, no one ever cuts anything in DC. Everyone says they're going to do it. No one does. Doge just started cutting. No one can dispute that. The cuts
and they're freaked out.
Yep. And they're freaked out now about that.
It's an attack on democracy. I mean, bureaucracy.
Right. So the second level of criticism is, well, they're cutting, but what they're cutting doesn't really matter because the majority of money is actually funding entitlements. And they're never going to touch entitlements, right? That's that'd be insane. So it's just going to be insignificant. Therefore, it doesn't matter. Which hilarious critique, because do you think $200 billion matters to me personally as the one paying for it? You bet it does. But when they were talking about Social Security, specifically, the conversation was about whether or not they were saying how when Elon was with PayPal, and he's like, he knows this, we know it. In order to find fraudsters, the easiest way to do it is to shut down automatic payments, because the people that make the biggest fuss and most noise about it often are the fraudsters. They're the ones causing problems. And then he said, the 90-year-old grandmas, sweet American grandmas that are trusting of the government, if a payment didn't show up, their first thought wouldn't be, I need to go burn the government to the ground. Their thought would be, oh, there's probably just a glitch. There's something wrong or whatever, just a misunderstanding. I'm sure it'll show up next week or the week after that. So hilarious reframe job when that was the full context of the conversation. Like, oh no, they're going to shut it down on the 9-year-old grandmas. Like, no. But I guess, Erica, I'll ask you, is there any serious talk about cutting Social Security?
No. And in fact, there is adamant support for keeping Social Security going from Trump. And you can find compilations of these clips that have been put together where Trump is like, we're not touching Social Security or Medicare or Medicaid. We're not touching it. We had Carolyn Levitt out over the weekend saying we are not going to touch it. But what the left heard, or what
we're not going to cut it. I mean, Medicaid, they might decide to decrease the increase, but they're not going to cut it.
They're not going to cut it. But what they're picking up on in like Axios and Politico and on MSNBC and all the talk shows over the weekend was they want to go in and find the fraud, waste, and abuse and cut that out of Social Security. And you can remember from those first weeks of Doge where we got things like there's 39 150-year-olds collecting. There's a 369-year-old who's collecting on Social Security or Medicare or something. And so Doge is uncovering these ridiculous and obvious examples that there is something deeply flawed going on in the system. And it has become so encrusted with fraud that we have to do something to get this done so that the money can actually go where it's supposed to go, to grandma. But again, like you said, the hatchet job on Lutnick's interview was just like, let's chop it up here, and we're just going to say he said he's going to cut Social Security.
Right. I mean,
unsurprising.
What Axios isn't doing anything that would be any different than, like, Senator Chris Murphy, your home state of your native,
my neighbor,
state, native
Chris.
State. I mean, like, it literally is just a hatchet job. Like, as like, for example, the same thing that happened when Trump talked about, ramping down the Department of Education. Like, we're not touching student loans. We're going to shift that over to the other thing. But what the left does is they immediately think, okay, let's find the most popular thing on our side and accuse them of doing, even though they make clear 5 times they're not doing it.
Right.
And so it's like, we want to get rid of the Department of Education because we don't want bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. to use school lunches as leverage to force, boys into girls' bathrooms. That's the Trump administration view. So let's shut down this stuff. This is crazy. And the left goes, oh, you want to make it so that kids can't get student loans anymore. And they can't go to the college they want to. You're like, wait, what? No, we explicitly said. So they just are absolute lying through their freaking teeth. And so when it comes to the Social Security stuff, they're like, they want to cut Social Security. They want to cut your check. You can't do that. Like, here's the thing. Republicans are debating this bill, and they're going to use a budget bill. They're going to do reconciliation, right? There are rules about reconciliation. You can't just do whatever you want to do.
Right.
You cannot actually cut Social Security through reconciliation. Republicans do not have the ability to do that. They cannot cut Social Security. Even if they wanted to, they could not. Functionally, they do not have 60 senators. They cannot do it. So it would be a total lie. If they're going through the system and making sure the people who are receiving checks are actually like the people who deserve
alive,
it, not a scam.
Yeah, right. That'd be a good start.
How is that cutting Social Security? Wait a minute. We believe that we should have the right to scam our government. Like, what are the Democrats saying? But they just lie.
Right. And case in point, we had family members texting us because we are the token Trumpers in the family. So we're having family members text us, be like, "Oh my gosh, Mom's Social Security is going to get cut because of Trump, and he wants to cut it." And all they had to do was dig one layer down and find another source and say, "Okay, what was actually done?" But the Democrats bank on the fact that 80% of Americans don't do any digging. They see the headline, they hear the snippet on MSNBC, which is playing in every restaurant all over Connecticut. And they're like, "Oh my gosh, look, I knew it. I knew Trump was horrible," because they see Social Security in a headline.
Should have listened to the full Lutnick interview. It was super interesting.
It was, oh my gosh, I could listen to him all day. He's like, I love these guys from like New York. And they just he's like listening to Tom Homan. It's like, get out the popcorn. I just love listening to these guys
Tom
talk.
Homan
Some people
and
hate it.
Lutnick have two different vibes, but
they're very different vibes.
Perfect for what they do. I mean,
but they're characters, you know?
Totally. Like he's like one of those guys that you could just listen to all day. Like he's the caricature of a New York Jewish businessman who's super wealthy, loves to swap stories. And so it was interesting hearing them kind of question on tariffs, on the Panama Canal. I want them to get back to...
The Panama Canal segment was great.
Someone was just criticizing, like, they did this whole new media initiative to help them win the election, and it seems like recently they've kind of gotten away from handing big interviews back to independent sources. So they've gone back to, Meet the Press or CSNBC. And I actually felt like Bissett especially really shined in that kind of comfortable. He's great on the other stuff too, but in a friendly audience, just explaining basic questions, like for Lutnick, they were talking about tariffs. So like, okay, the common objection to tariffs is that it's going to impose basically a tax on the American people, and it's going to inflate the economy because then we're going to spend less, sending us into a recession. He kind of calmly was like, okay, well, no, like putting a tariff on something is not going to inflate anything. It just means that one good is going to be more expensive because it's made somewhere else, as opposed to something made here is going to be less expensive, therefore incentivizing economic opportunity for people to start making things here. Just rebalancing the balance of trade. I think it's been eye-opening. I think he was talking about a meeting he had with, was it Modi from India? And he asked, why don't you ever buy corn from America? Trump basically let him do that. And he's like, he didn't really have an answer, but they have huge tariffs on American goods in India. Everyone does. We are the world's grocery shopper. So if you imagine, like, America consumes a shocking amount of in monetary value, as even opposed to places like China with bigger populations. We buy stuff from everywhere, all around the world. It's like a big grocery store to us. And so we have all the leverage right now of it's not worth making something if we're not going to consume it. So why are we allowing, basically the argument is we're getting taken advantage of by having no tariffs, not protecting any domestic industry. And that might be great for, say, General Motors, but not great for factory worker in Michigan and Ohio, American, who lost their job and their way of life, all because we can produce cars for a little bit cheaper now. So people are going to be able to buy it for like $1,000.
But there are those in this country who get very rich from us being consumers and not producers. Mm-hmm. And totally. That's the problem.
Right. And part of why we see such wealth disparity that I actually am frustrated with as well. Like we have like 50% of the country did phenomenal during COVID because the stock market was artificially inflated, where the people that had no real assets didn't own anything in the stock market. Their purchasing power evaporated and now they'll never be able to buy anything. I mean, I'm in that camp, like personally. This isn't like abstract to me. I feel like I've been sold out by the Biden administration. So anyway, we got more to get to. Yeah. I could talk about that.
Can I just share my favorite? I'm going to share my favorite Scott Bessent quote from last week. This was, he was being asked about ensuring like Americans can build financial security and the tariffs and the cheap imports. And he said, quote, "Access to cheap goods is not the essence of the American dream. The American dream is rooted in the concept that a citizen can achieve prosperity, upward mobility, and economic security. It's not let them eat flat screens."
Yep. I think it was like Chinese baubles was another term that he used. Like, love that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So good.
Let them eat flat screens. Hopefully Scott comes to a better end than Marie Antoinette, who didn't actually really say let them eat cake, but it's a good story.
All right. Next section. So maybe you guys experienced this with me over the weekend. So if you pop on Twitter, and part of the frustrating part about Twitter now is the monetization. So big accounts are incentivized to just throw things out and get a ton of attention. But I saw some very eerily similar posts. Important. We cannot allow "Make America Healthy Again" messaging to be used, to force needy Americans into not buying things. Some officials in D.C. are working on trying to prevent Americans on SNAP from using those benefits to purchase any soda. Remember when New York City Democrats tried to prevent people from buying and consuming soda? It backfired big time. President Trump literally has a Diet Coke button in his Oval Office. Let people think and decide for themselves. Anyone consumes soda, and it's perfectly fine in moderation, unless we are going to ban every food with sugar in it from SNAP for Americans. Now, 4 other accounts basically posted the exact same thing, and no one online was talking about banning soda or SNAP. Like, this was just a total inorganic injection into
AstroTurf.
Yeah, right. And it was like really obvious to me. I was like, this makes no sense. No one was talking about this. It's coming from nowhere. Well, it turns out, and shout out to Nick Sodor, went through the thread here. There's this thing called Influenceable, where they will pay large accounts up to $1,000 to post a script that they're given or a variant of the script. They even give them suggestions for images. In this case, Donald Trump drinking diet soda.
Sign me up. I need to be
Where's our money, dude? Yeah.
Just kidding.
I'm not for sale, but I might be for rent, people. Give me a call.
Yeah, we got Bev and Cart Choice.
What do you want me to do?
We just have people that are basically cozy with big soda and then big influencers, and they're connecting them through these artificial influence campaigns. And this has happened a lot of times, for good or for worse. I mean, it depends on the campaign. Influenceable themselves are kind of apolitical. They don't really care which side it's taken influence, but a good reminder just to be aware of stuff that doesn't look right probably isn't right.
Well, I'm going to push back a little bit.
Go for it.
You said that there wasn't really any necessarily proposal in Congress that just sort of came out of nowhere. I mean, I think this is the soda industry is worried that there might be something pushed down from Bobby Kennedy at HHS, like as they could pass some sort of rule saying SNAP you can't use soft drinks or energy drinks or something like that for your food stamps. You wouldn't be able to use it. You could buy you just remove it from the list of things you could purchase. And the reason why to do that, I don't even like. First of all, if you want to spend some of the extra money you have as a luxury, I consider soft drinks a luxury. So why would we give it to people who import? Like, if you want food stamps, you should be getting food that you need. And above that, and if you want a little bit of a treat, like some ice cream, fine. But like, the reason why it would be smart to, and maybe this is what Bobby Kennedy was trying to do, is put, you hear about rumors behind the scene of, a possible policy change. The reason to change this is because some people will go through and they use their food stamps, they buy Coke, and they go outside and they sell it on pennies on the dollar, so they get the cash to buy whatever they want. So that stuff does happen. And so I think that's another reason, like, well, let's not do that. That's an abuse of the system. It's an abuse of charity. And let's remove it from the list of things that you can buy.
I tried to look into it a little bit. 2016 USDA report: SNAP households spent about 9.3% of their total food expenditures on sweetened beverages, including soft drinks, fruit drinks, energy drinks, and other sugar sweetened beverages. Something to note too, like, this is an average. So there could be households that are doing 0% and then others that are doing 40%. So there could be people that are even higher than this, which is crazy talk. And then what's hilarious about all this, I feel like there's the obvious logical thing, and then there's kind of political instincts, I guess. The logical obvious thing is, if you have people spending a majority on their SNAP food, this is supposed to be supporting people that can't buy anything with their own money. And Josh said a luxury item. But this luxury item happens to be just about the worst possible substance you can put in your body, which is therefore going to lead to you being obese if you're consuming it and not selling it, which is a whole nother issue. And then the obesity needs to get covered by Medicaid.
So
exactly.
And then you're on Medicaid. Yes.
Covered. So this makes no sense.
You're addicted to the state. Congratulations.
It's not right. And it's not good for anyone. It's not good for taxpayers because they obviously have to pay for this. It's not good for the people themselves because they're going to be obese and unhealthy and have all kinds of other issues. So this is for sure, I think, what people sent RFK Jr. in to do, is to look at the root causes of why we are so chronically unhealthy. And I mean, if I was a lobbyist for big soda or whatever, 1 second on your hot take, I would be spending this money trying to influence too, because they know that it's horrible for people. And they fund all these studies to try to
Right.
make it look like it's not. But you're throwing a liquid bomb in your body every time you drink soda. It's really unbelievable how much sugar are in these things. So, yeah, terrible idea. I actually were you going to bring up the rice and beans things, Josh?
No, but just really quickly, some people made note in the chat that healthy food is expensive, and I actually disagree. Food is maybe expensive, but like we make this distinction between healthy food and junk food's cheap. If it's junk food and it's cheap, it's not food, really. It's not really food. Like that's the one.
Cheetos are
As I'm
not
talking
food.
about this, people are like, "Oh my gosh, it's so much cheaper to get, chips and pretzels." It's like, well, it's not really a food. It's like a side dish, and you shouldn't eat the whole bag, bro. Like it's dried bread. I mean, give me a break. Whereas actual food, food is expensive. That is true. But like junk edibles, that's not really food in the sense you think of it. Like a real like meat, greens, real side dishes like potatoes, that kind of stuff. That's what food is. And we have this view that kind of stuff is expensive because we see all this subsidized corn chips that are so cheap because we give money to the ag industry. Like actual nutritional food, real balanced food. Yeah, that might be expensive, but like get off this mindset that it's the junk food's cheaper, so we should eat that. Like it's not. Is it cheaper?
Yeah.
Is it really cheaper if it kills you?
Right, and it's a question of portion. It's like we have a lot of people to feed in our house, and so we do most of our shopping at Walmart. And yeah, it would be really expensive for us to do like 100% organic, like all the, we are going to eat Mediterranean style. But to be full, like you really need, rice is not expensive. Brown rice is really good for you. Potatoes are not that expensive. Way better for you than having a side of chips is like make steak fry. I think a big portion of it is also a big portion. Get it? I think a big part of it is not just portion size and our expectation as Americans that we're going to have these giant meals 3 times a day, but also the time that it takes to prepare healthy food in a less expensive way. So it's a massive cultural shift that I know I have to continually be making in my mind that like, okay, God has given us these children, means we cannot go buy like pre-made Whole Foods salads for like lunches and make it really fast, but we have to actually be really intentional about how we eat. And I think when it comes to government handouts and like you said, Josh, charity with food, it's more charitable to say we're going to pay for healthy foods, right? That they're basic, they're not fancy, but that would be the charitable way to spend the taxpayer dollars supporting brothers and sisters who can't afford it. Hello.
I mean, and you have situations where the government's like, well, you can use your food stamps to buy skim milk, but not whole milk. It's like, well, whole milk's better for you than skim milk.
Right.
Like it's so
that
bizarre.
Doesn't make sense. Yeah.
Take that
Come on,
food
RFK.
pyramid of yours from the
I'm here for
60s
it.
and shove it right where the sun don't shine.
Give me that real butter. I want the whole stick of the real butter.
Margarine and low-fat pretzels. That's what you want. Like,
Stay
no,
away from
I don't want to
mayonnaise.
die. Stop
Fake
it.
mayonnaise.
You lie,
All right.
you lie, you lie.
All right. We're moving on. So we're going to do a little pre-Twilight Zone. I can't believe this day is upon us, but Snow White has been released. Theatrical release. It's the live-action, controversy bedeviled Snow White in theaters. Opened with $43 million in ticket sales, which I think proves to me, I don't think it's as much hate watching as much as it is like little girls are probably not watching commentary YouTubers or on Twitter, so are just going to go see Snow White. That's according to studio estimates. So with a budget of above $250 million, I think it had higher ambitions. And it was the 1937 original, obviously Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, was the first animated feature. I want to say, wasn't it the first animated American movie too?
It was like the first massive Disney like full-length feature. So I think it was the first full-length animated feature from Disney. That would be the category.
Yeah, wasn't Anastasia the first one that Disney did? What was it called? Like
someone can fact check that.
I'm going to go fact check this while you give the lowdown.
So yeah, the pre-Twilight Zone. The reason why people are talking about this as like mercifully released, for a quick refresher on probably how not to promote a movie. Here we have the press tour, which was just certifiably insane.
longer 1937.
She's not going to be saved by the prince.
She's not going to be saved by the prince, and she's not going to be dreaming about true love. She's dreaming about becoming the leader she knows she can be, and the leader that her late father told her that she could be if she was fearless, fair, brave, and true. The original cartoon came out in 1937, and very evidently so. There's a big focus on her love story with a guy who literally stalks her. Weird. So we didn't do that this time. I was scared of the original cartoon. I think I watched it once and then I never picked it up again. I watched it for the first time in probably 16, 17 years. The cartoon was made 85 years ago, and therefore it's extremely dated when it comes to the ideas of women being in roles of power. No longer.
That is the lead actress for the movie.
Out there promoting.
I've never seen someone hate the movie
Come
they're
see my
lead
movie.
of so much. It was just unbelievable. So that already was just like bad start, tough. And then the second part is during more promotion in 2024, Rachel Zegler posted on X thanking fans after the trailer release, but then said, "And always remember, free Palestine." For people not aware, Gal Gadot, I believe, was in the IDF.
She was.
She literally served in the Israeli defense.
Yeah.
Not great. So that didn't go over super well either. And then after the 2024 election went down, Trump, Zegler posted on Instagram, "May Trump supporters and Trump voters and Trump himself never know peace." So I would say the grand slam of all things you probably should not be doing when promoting a movie, just in general, but let alone $250 million project based on a story that you clearly hate. There's also, if you remember the dwarf controversy, they released the dwarfs, and they were a very merry, diverse band of
non-dwarfs, right?
Yeah,
And
that was the whole thing. Like, somebody objected to the idea that you'd have a live action movie like this with actual real life people who are dwarfs,
Little people, right?
Because that's condescending. So we have
The
to have regular
D-word.
people and use CGI to make them look like they're dwarfs. And so then other actual actors who are dwarfs are like, "Oh, great! So you do a movie
You're right.
that I have a chance to star in, and you cut us out of in it because you like us." Yeah,
It was tough.
You don't want us to be discriminated against. So
So
Oh my
this
God.
is like a death by 1,000 paper cuts. This
dwarves out of work, and they replaced them with these like kind of scary looking CGI dwarves, which also were visually jarring during reshoots because they had to reshoot it with CGI dwarves around her now, which is not ideal. That also ballooned the budget, so I think it started at $209 million, and then after extensive reshoots, up to $269.4 million. I mean, I didn't even watch the movie. Going to be come forward. Didn't even watch the movie. I saw some reviews on it. They were pretty hilarious. What was at this point? I almost forgot.
Of course not. I mean, like, can I just ask a question?
Wait, Josh. Before, I almost forget at this point what the original Snow White, like the point of it was, because it's just gotten so maligned. I'm like, what was even compelling about the story to begin with? So, like, what was the original Snow White, Erica, the literary expert, and why did why was it timeless?
Okay, so the original Snow White, we don't know when this story came about. It rose in history in the Bavarian Alps at some point. And of course, the Brothers Grimm wrote it down. So we're talking like mid-19th century at this point. They write this down. And the first Disney, the 1937, was pretty close to the Brothers Grimm. So you have a king and a queen who long for a child. They can't have a child. The queen has a little daughter, and I will quote, "as white as snow, as red as blood, and as black as ebony wood, and therefore they called her Little Snow White." In the movie with Rachel Zegler, they apparently changed it to, "she was born during a snowstorm, so they named her Snow White." Get it?
Oh, no.
I think Tim Young's review over at Daily Signal was the best. And he's like, watching this was like watching a 7-year-old come up with a story and just starting every plot twist with, and then they like completely do something random. But the original Snow White, I mean, all these fairy tales are kind of bizarre, a little bit dark. They usually have to do with innocence. There's someone innocent. There's something evil. The evil comes, attacks innocence, and tries to degrade it and tear it apart. And then someone, through self-sacrificial love, comes and saves the innocent. Something else that Tim Young said was, oh no, this was Anthony Esselin. Anthony Esselin's review was, look, you can't make a true fairy tale movie if you don't believe in true innocence. And you can't make a fairy tale if you don't have childlike wonder. And clearly the people who made this film have neither innocence nor wonder because they lost the plot. I did go and look up the original Grimm, the way it ends. So at the ending of the Disney movie, the 1937, the Wicked Witch there's a big thunderstorm and she falls off a tree branch and into a ravine and you never see her again. You don't see if she dies. Here's how the Grimm brothers ended it. At the wedding of the prince in Snow White, the wicked woman comes to view her her stepdaughter, and she cannot bear the beauty of it all. When she arrives, she recognized Snow White and, terrorized, can only stand there without moving. And so the men put a pair of iron shoes into burning coals. The iron shoes were brought forth with tongs and placed before her. She was forced to step into the red hot shoes and dance until she fell down dead.
Oh,
that's the original.
I said we gotten soft.
I mean, that was hardcore German Bavarian fairy tale for you.
Yeah. Didn't people get like eaten all the time?
Yeah, people are always being eaten. Those were like Brother Grimm's. Yeah.
Well, I mean, you have these stories like, of wolves and, like, why are we so afraid of the wolves? Like, because wolves, I mean.
They were a real problem in 1812.
Like wolves would actually attack children and kill them. Like, this is not you live in a forest, like, this really happened. I mean, like, that's, again, I think like 1883 and the 1923 and all that, Yellowstone series, like they do some things that they do exaggerate it, but like there was like the frontier, so you have to have some of these fairy tale stories to kind of explain things and work things through. I get it, but yeah, this is a flop. I mean, of course it's a flop. I mean, I don't know. I feel like I mentioned this before. We're like in a golden age of television, and like movie theater stuff is all boring. Like the economics aren't there anymore. So like I haven't gone to like Thor Ragnarok was the last thing I saw in a theater, 2017. Whoa. I love that movie. But that's like the exception that proves the rule. Like I've never had a desire, I can't wait to see this in theater instead of waiting 2 months and watching in my own house. Like, I don't get it.
No, I saw Maverick. Maverick Top Gun in the theater was cool because of the like flying. That was kind of cool, full screen. But
yeah, but I still waited until it came out on streaming.
Can I ask a question to both of you? I don't even really know the answer to this per se. I understand the economic incentive of just remaking stuff that people already have an affinity towards, like the live action remakes, whatever. Like I think it makes sense. It gets people in the door. That does. But it seems to me there's a streak of, and hopefully this is ending soon, who knows, people making movies that they hate the source material of, and that doesn't make sense to me.
Just to tarnish it.
Yeah, but like they would waste all that money just to tarnish something that was beloved. I mean, you look back to the original Snow White; it was very clear that there was a respect, at least. I know there was even actually argument at the time of kind of sanitizing the Brothers Grimm stuff, but there was a respect and love and innocence, to your point, of the original story. And that there was something good and worth showing to the audience and sharing with the broader world the magic of Snow White at the time, or even other early princess movies and things like that. And I think of movies now that are good, there's a love of what is being put forward, and maybe there's a perverted sense of love of what they're doing to Snow White, or the original intent was before all the reshoots and backlash was like people love the idea of kind of a feminist retelling of a story that had nothing to do with that, and they love that, so they're willing to do
Star Wars.
Star Wars was another one that I thought of big time, because that. So maybe it is like I just need to look at it like everyone has.
You know what it is, Tom?
Something.
I think you're identifying something right. Sorry to interrupt, but like I guess the point there's so many Star Wars. I mean, there are girls that like Star Wars. I'm not doubting that at all, of course. But when I was a kid, it was all boys, almost always boys. And it was boys, age 10 to 14 that just absolutely treasured and loved it so much. And then there are people out there that almost hate them for liking it. And they want to like come into their swimming pool and, poop on the parade. And like they have like a visceral reaction that you seem to be enjoying this. And so like they want to wreck Star Wars and make it their own and get a bunch of, so they ruin the Star Wars 7, 8, 9, and they're like, and people like me who grew up on it, like, these are really great stories. I like to tell my kids, and they like almost revel in that. That's making people like me mad. Like, this is such a weird way to operate a fan base. Like,
let me add to that. I think I saw that very personally, actually, recently with, I don't know if you guys saw the Joker movie, and then they did Joker Full A Do.
I haven't watched
I actually kind of randomly watched it with my wife. I watched the first Joker movie, and I'm kind of done with superhero movies personally. I'm just kind of tired of them.
Oh my gosh!
But
Yes.
I actually found the Joker movie to be super compelling, down to earth, great acting performance.
The one with Heath Ledger?
No. The one with Joaquin Phoenix.
Oh, okay.
It came out 2016, fairly recently, maybe even sooner than that. But basically, people were mad that movie ended up being a success because people they thought were liking it for the wrong reasons. Mm-hmm. So the reason,
how dare you
look at this and think that because the guy was a struggling, I think he was a clown or struggling comedian, and it was kind of a really personal, gritty, poignant retelling of a young man struggling and his suffering turning him into basically nothing matters and a nihilist and just causing anarchy. And people, to me personally, and I'm not an anarchist, I thought it was fascinating. It was just a really well done, well told story. But because the fandom that got around it was like, oh, they liked it, they shouldn't have liked it for this reason. And so with Joker 2, the sequel, they had the same guy, they gave him a ton of money. And I guarantee they told him, like, you need to tarnish this character, basically. You can't tell the story that you told before or build upon it. You actually need to deconstruct it through the sequel. And they did. And people were enraged. They were so mad that this was done because it was so obvious what was being done. It was, you like this for the wrong reason, and therefore we're going to blow it up. Right. With a lot of money and fanfare in your faces.
If I could I want to just interject there because I think that, pointing to the economics of it, there is that component of what has happened to our film industry, but there's also a spiritual component. And I think when you said the word deconstruct, that's something that we're seeing across the board. So not only in things like the Star Wars, in what you saw with the Joker movie, we just saw what Captain America, the star, come out and be like, Captain America's not about America. Like, we have to deconstruct to that. And then, I mean, I see it on the female side of things with like the Jane Austen remakes that we have now, Little Women remakes that turn these classic stories of femininity and what it means to be a woman, what it means to fall in love and pursue marriage with a man, the sort of deconstructing of that. Like, we can't just do Jane Austen. Now we have to do Jane Austen and remake her in our own image. And I think it's because spiritual poverty can't be creative in itself. It can't come up with its own original content. It has to be parasitic upon the good, the true, and the beautiful. And so we see these good stories, and then we see people who, for whatever reason, have some kind of spiritual poverty, and then we can go into all those. We always love to point back to sexual revolution, goes way before that, but they end up taking what's good from our society and our American culture and being like, I gotta tear this down and remake it in my own image. And it's an idolatry and a poverty.
Well, and just to wrap it up, I mean, like, with Snow White, there is a minor critique I would almost agree with Rachel Ziegler on. Like, the idea, like, Disney has created this whole industry of like the dainty princess, and she needs to be rescued, and so that's one element that she's pushing back at, and she's saying, but then her answer to that is that Snow White should be a girl boss. Like, that's not the answer either. Like, I don't need a man. Okay, great. And so, like, if we actually had true, like, femininity that's not like completely like a dainty little, like, I'm gonna die if I don't need help, but like also like a true feminine woman, like a real woman, that would, because men and women are in this together, and there's nothing wrong with the man leading the way, and there's nothing wrong with the woman being the heart of the home. But so again, like, there are some critiques you could say about the Disney princess complex stuff, but if the answer is to, you go, girl, you don't need men, like, well, that's not the answer either. So
no, you know what I'm dreading? I am dreading the Little House on the Prairie remake. I don't know. I don't think I'm going to be able to handle what they do to Ma and Pa. They're going to kill it. That's my prediction. I hope I'm wrong.
It's going to be good.
I hope I'm jaded.
They're going to make some reference to gay something. The big example of this, I thought, was High School Musical. I went back and watched it. Talk about a different time and different innocence.
No kidding.
But there was like one guy who played basketball. I think it was Corbin Blue's character. All he wanted to do was bake. And he's like, dude, I just want to make creme brulee. And they did a whole dance number around him just wanting to do creme brulee. And they're like, no, you got to stick to the status quo and ball out. And 100% that would be about him being like pansexual or something now. Like there's 100%. I was like, there's no way they don't
figure
make
it out
this.
anyway. You know,
Yeah, exactly.
dancing.
No,
to
dude, he was
creme
just
brulee.
my boy just want to make creme brulee. He didn't want to ball out. So anyway, March Madness time. Quick note, Josh, I wanted to get in quick. So Pope Francis, it appears awesome, made first public appearance since being hospitalized February 14th. So it looks like the prayers are paying off. We had 3,000 people gathered outside of Rome's Gemelli Hospital. So super encouraging. Glad to see that from Pope
And
Francis.
he's now he went home and he stopped by Mary Major, the basilica there dedicated to Our Lady, and had flowers placed there. He's been to Mary Major 100 times. It's his favorite pilgrimage site there in Rome. And so now he's back home. But interestingly enough, the doctor said he needs rest. He needs 2 months of rest. And I actually, that caught my eye that they said 2 months. That was very interesting. They said 2 months.
Why?
Well, what's going on 2 months from now is there is going to be a celebration in Turkey where the Orthodox leaders there, and they've invited the Pope to come and celebrate the 1700th anniversary of the Council of Nicaea. And so Pope Francis desperately wants to try to be healthy enough to be able to go to that. That's a very big thing, you know,
Massive.
celebration of the council that gave us the Nicene Creed and so much more. And obviously that's before the split between the Orthodox and Catholics. So that would be great. We would love to have him healthy enough to be there, but I'm just not so sure, you know, like 2 months of recovery, we would hope. But again, you get to this age where you're 88 years old and you spent this long a time in the hospital. Trying to do international travel is going to be a difficult undertaking. So anyway, obviously continue prayers for his health.
For sure.
Will be.
Okay, Twilight Zone, we can rip them quick. Josh, what do you got?
Well, hey, you know, we talked about the problems of the Democratic Party, and one columnist for the Boston Globe has a recommendation on how to make things better. Get rid of Chuck Schumer as the Senate Minority Leader, who caved to the Republicans by keeping the government funded, by not filibustering their bill. Their recommendation is Senator Elizabeth Warren should be the leader of the Senate Democrats. Look at that, huh? Get rid of Chuck Schumer and bring in Senator Karen. The problem is we talked about the problem that the Democratic Party had in winning young men. Why don't you bring in this scold who is going to tell them, you need to get your 17th COVID vax shot, and how dare you, you know. Oh man, this would be this.
Josh, what is, just from a political perspective, what is keeping them from putting AOC in charge?
Well, AOC can't be in charge of the Senate Democrats, obviously. She can be in charge of the House side.
Rather, I mean, just like the face of the party, like in terms of any actual.
Well, this is the part, the party that's out of power. That, you know, you don't have the presidency anymore. Biden's out, so now who's the leader of the Democratic Party? It's a tough call. Like, there's the leader of the Senate Democrats, Chuck Schumer, but he's extremely unpopular right now for Democrats. Is it Hakeem Jeffries, the Senate, minority leader in the House? Like, people still don't even know who he is hardly. AOC is the name that's out there that's big. Bernie Sanders is out there with AOC going across the country making, and that's an interesting.
And I would just swing them
dynamic.
even further left, right? They're not.
Is that Bernie like passing the torch and saying she's going to run for president, in 2028? Is that what's going on?
I think.
But
so I don't know, man. Though, I mean, can you imagine? This is just a columnist for the Boston Globe recommending this. But man, if Democrats were foolish enough to make Elizabeth Warren the leader of the Senate,
I'm here for it. Go for it,
Donald
guys.
Trump would be like, how do I keep winning? Like, he'd be so happy.
I almost picked her. She put out several. I think she's trying to be like Gen Z hip appeal, but she's putting out these videos, like these quick 30-second videos on Twitter of her like yelling into the camera really close up about the Department of Education or whatever Trump last did in the last 24 hours. She just starts yelling into the camera, and I almost use it as my Twilight Zone, being like, "Is this the new strategy?"
That's the new thing.
Yeah. Someone was like, some strategists like, you guys need to swear more. Like Chris Murphy does it the most. He's like,
you got to be authentic. I mean,
that somehow makes you authentic. I don't know.
I got to work on that. That's one of my things. I got to try to swear less. So
yeah, but at least it's authentic.
But I don't do it on this podcast, and I don't on purpose. I'm going to swear to show I'm gritty and real.
Right, but if it just randomly comes about, it's actually the opposite of authentic. They never did this before, and now some strategists like you got to throw it in there. Like the only people I really believe it for is maybe Fetterman.
Yeah, that would be about the only one.
That's about it.
Or Tom Homan.
Okay. Yeah, you know who else did it recently, which cracked me up? Pete Buttigieg. He's the last person I would be like, this is an authentic fake. F word out of Pete.
Trump does it a little too often.
Right, but at least it's authentic.
Yeah, and it's usually.
I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just saying
it's not like a social media video he posts.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, Erica, what you got?
Yeah, I just wanted to mark, this is really quick. I just wanted to mark, it's the 15th anniversary yesterday of the Affordable Care Act. And President Barack Obama, he took to Twitter to remind all of us of this great moment in our national history when he saved us all. He made sure that 50 million people who are now receiving health care through the Affordable Care Act. And he was his statement, "It's easy to feel with everything going on right now, like regular folks can't make a difference. But the Affordable Care Act is a reminder that change is possible when we keep fighting for progress." And then we get this from the U.S. Bureau of Statistics, just a reminder that healthcare costs since 2010 took a sharp turn upwards. The Affordable Care Act was fully implemented by 2014, and today the average 38% above the predicted or above the pre-ACA trend. So, in fact, you did not keep your doctor. Your healthcare costs went way up, and they continue to rise. And so, Barack Obama, this is one anniversary I prefer to forget. And if that's your legacy, I probably would just go crawl in a hole and hope nobody looks at me ever again.
Again, I've talked about.
So happy anniversary, Josh.
My age and place here. I don't know a world pre.
Right, this is your whole life, Pogo. Has been
my insurance has just been terrible my entire adult life. Yeah, I don't. I'm having kids too, so I feel it personally.
Mm-hmm.
If we're talking about anniversaries, today is also the 40th anniversary of the kids going to detention at Sherman High School for the Breakfast Club.
Oh,
thank you for that.
Wow, that's
okay.
Forget about me, so I didn't.
I have two quick ones. Okay, first one, 23andMe is filing for bankruptcy. I regret to inform any of you that have done this. Yes, your DNA is potentially up for sale.
Wow.
I don't think they're going to want to replicate me, so I'm not really
worried.
Yeah,
not too worried about that. No.
I'll let the mic rock on that one. Not ideal. Human genetic information could be sold in bankruptcy proceedings.
Oh, great. Who do you think is going to angle to buy that? China? We'll buy it.
Whoever it is should be stopped. Okay, so my next one's a little bit more complex. We've been talking a lot about movies recently. There is a series on Netflix called Adolescence. And
this should be fun.
Yeah, it has now reached the halls of Parliament in the UK. Now, I'll share a picture. So Adolescence is about a young kid, I think he's 14, where this guy plays the role of a hardworking dad who's shocked when police turn up at his door to arrest his son. 4-part drama looks at the impact of social media on teenage boys and how it is increasingly exposing them to radical views. The co-writer said, where it came from for me is there was this incident in Liverpool, a young girl, and she was stabbed to death by a young boy. And I just thought, why? Then there was another young girl in South London who was stabbed to death at a bus stop. He was killed by Hassan Sentamu after she got off a bus outside of
Swedish.
Yeah, Old Palace of John Wick. So anyway, this is in 2023. So if you want to take a look with me at the pictures here, and I didn't even do this at first, but here's the picture of the young man playing this killer. So here is a picture of
the
actual killer, Hassan. So for the audio listeners, pretty clearly race swapped it looks like an African young man for a pretty British looking young white dude. And like, if that was just it, I was like, yeah, it's annoying. And the race swapping stuff is annoying to me. But that's not even it. So that's why I was going to do this as a Twilight Zone, because I saw this and I was like, this is crazy. And then, so you get this video from Parliament here, and this is kind of how these work, right? I mean, I'll play the video, but.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Everyone is talking about Adolescence, the series by Knowsley's own Stephen Graham and Christine Tamarco. It highlights online male radicalisation and violence against girls. The creators of the show are calling for screenings in Parliament and schools to spark change. So will the Prime Minister back this campaign to counter toxic misogyny early and give young men the role models they deserve?
Yeah. Prime Minister. Yes, and at home we are watching Adolescence with our children. I've got a 16-year-old boy and a 14-year-old girl, and it's a very, very good documentary to watch, or drama.
All right, I just want to get to that word documentary. So everyone rightfully pretty outraged about this this obvious race swapping going on from the creators. And this now has reached Congress or Parliament, and now he's calling it a documentary. So the writers instantly, when all this backlash came out, were like, no, this isn't based. This was inspired by this, but this is kind of a dramatized.
Inspired by.
We're working with creative liberties. And I'm like, okay, fine. But then I looked into the original murder, and I think it was over a teddy bear, but there really wasn't any true evidence that this actually was like an incel online type thing. I saw that the kid had written notes basically alluding to something like this, but not the online stuff. So there's so many layers of deception here. So the first one being the obvious race swap into someone who's white, which is problematic because there's truly racial tension and stabbing problems in the UK. There's now that it's being considered as a documentary from Parliament, who have turned it into something that is so far from the original event, an actual real problem in Britain. It's now been directed on young, toxic, white, little British males that like now all of a sudden are catching a stray on this. And then all of this after there's a systematic cover up of immigrant rape gangs in the UK.
Under Keir Starmer, who won't investigate them, who gets up and is like, oh, this is a great documentary. Right.
And anyone that came forward and said, hey, I was a victim of this immigrant rape game embedded into the UK government, they were called racist and shamed from society and whatever. So I'm like, I don't even know where to begin with this. Maybe the original writers didn't intend for this to become this thing, but the UK government is sure now using this as somewhat of a cudgel to prove a point. And like, none of this is addressing the real problems for British people. So I'm like, I hope, electing Trump, maybe we're going to dodge a lot of these problems that I'm seeing right now in the UK, like really serious, obvious problems that are just being swept under the rug. And not only being swept under the rug, being flipped around now and be like, no, it's actually this. It's actually like the Andrew Tates of the world or whatever. And while that may actually be a problem, you can't say that you're inspired by a specific...
Talking about misdiagnosis.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, it's just so many layers of deception. I actually am now kind of angry about it. At first, I was like, okay, this is a dumb race swapping. But then also at the same time, we've gone through, how many times have we gone through race swapping and been like, you shouldn't be mad about this. You shouldn't be mad about this. You shouldn't be mad about this. Even if it's just something small. It's like, we're changing the race of Snow White, or we're changing the race of Princess Ariel or whatever. And now it's like, we're changing the race of the most hot button murder issue in the UK, and we're going to make it a white kid instead of the kid it actually was in real life. It's kind of crazy to me.
Well, and talk about like you're saying you want to get to the root problems of this. It seems like changing the facts would prevent you from getting to the root causes of this whole thing. You're like, but maybe I'm just being like, heteronormativity, heteronormative science or something. But
it's
like,
one thing to do some historical thing
matter.
200 years ago where the main character in England is black, even though there were hardly any blacks in 1600 England at all, much less the central role of a show. And that's kind of stupid, kind of eye-rolling, kind of dumb race swapping. This kind of race swapping has negative consequences because they're now going after the wrong targets. It's like, give me a break. But will anyone talk about the rape gangs? And it's like,
whole thing's crazy.
It is crazy.
When it reached Parliament, it was called the documentary. I was like, I got to talk about this.
They need political courage in the UK, and it's not Great Britain anymore. They're not great. Britain needs to figure this out and turn the ship around. They need actual leaders like a Trump. And even in Canada, Pierre Poilievre, like, dude, you got to be stronger about this stuff. Like what immigration has done to try to transform your country. It's not good.
Right. They've got to get stronger. Hey, they have a date. Canada has a date for the election now,
Snap
April
election.
28th.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, the snaps.
We're gonna check that out for you. Hopefully they
we
can
love
turn it
covering
around.
our neighbors from the north, potentially.
We do.
State.
51st state. Governor Poilievre. I mean, that sounds great.
Okay. Great show today, guys. If you want to help out the program, you can subscribe here on YouTube. Best way. Check out Real Estate for Life. Thank you for sponsoring the episode. Join the Champions Club. It's the best way to support us. Thank you to all our champions listening today. You can leave us reviews on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Those do help out a lot. So if you guys want to take the chance, just go ahead. It's super easy. You can email me, loopcast@catholicboat.org. But, of course, pray for us. It's the most important thing. St. Thomas More, St. Fidelis, Our Lady of Guadalupe, pray for us. And we'll see you guys ready.